I'm currently head of officials at Liverpool Rollerbirds. Although that said, I have told them that I will be leaving them soon after their next game on the 27th of November. Been involved in roller derby since 2014, something like that. Currently got a very sore throat after Mech at the weekend. Lots of shouting at MRDA teams. But yeah, going to chat about impact and basically how to make a call and how not to make a call, because that's just as important. Along the way, we'll be talking about, it's not going to be going into the details about every penalty, but I will use some examples along the way. And if you have questions, please just stop me. Otherwise, I will just ramble on. So, first thing I wanted to talk about, really, sorry, I've just got my notes here. As I say, making a call is great, but it's not our aim as refs. Sometimes no calling things is just as good. So to make that call, though, you have to be certain to call it. If you're not 100% certain, don't call a penalty. Reason being is because A, your call could be official reviewed, which basically the teams can talk about. One team can ask for your call to be reviewed, in which case the refs and, well, the officials in general would have a discussion about that call. And if it's found that your call was incorrect, it could get overturned. That can be quite disheartening at times. It shouldn't be, because mistakes happen. We all make mistakes, myself included. But at the same time, during an official review, your call can be decided that it was correct and your call will stand. In terms of making a call, as I say, you have to be 100% sure about things. There's something that I don't believe is in the main rules. Might Skew or Basil probably be able to tell me a lot more than I would. But no, but it may be in the officiating guidelines. I haven't checked that recently. Something called the penalty triangle, which is basically you have to see three things to call a penalty. To be 100% sure of a penalty, rather. So first thing you have to see is the initiator. So who did something? Second thing you have to see is the action. So what the initiator did. And thirdly, you have to see the outcome. So what's happened from them doing something. So from there, if you haven't seen all of those three things, you can't make a call. Sorry, I think people are just typing away about whether that's actually in the officiating guidelines. Cool. Thanks, Basil.
Sorry, I've just joined. Were you just talking about this kind of triangle thing? Because I know I feel like you or someone else mentioned this triangle thing before. Like it's got to be like a legal action, impact. There's something else.
Yeah. Initiation, impact, and the action, and the outcome. It's phrased differently in different documents, to be honest with you. But basically, who did something, what they did, and what the outcome of what they did is. You have to see those three things to be able to call a penalty and to be 100% sure of that penalty. The first one is fairly simple. Who did what? So you have to see who it is. The action, that could be so many different eventualities. I'm not going to go into all of the examples. Basically, it could be using their forearm, could be using their leg, could be going off track and coming back on. And then, sorry, just reading Skew's message. Yeah, exactly. It's not an official thing within the documents of the WFDDA, but I'm not affiliated with the WFDDA in the same respect. This is just a very casual chat about things, if I'm going to be honest. So yeah, sorry, going back to it. The initiator, so the who did what, the who did something, the action, what they did, and then the outcome, what happened from them doing something.
Oh, thanks.
That's okay. Sorry, who was that, by the way?
It's
so
Catman.
Oh, hi.
So
hi,
just
Cat.
a voice in the dark.
Yeah, sorry, didn't realise who I was talking to because got two.
Actually,
I'm
I
on my
probably should have
mobile.
said. Yeah,
That's
hi,
all right, don't worry,
it's
Cat.
Catman. How do you?
Hi, by the way.
Hi.
That's all right. So, with this, if you know who the initiator is, first step. The second step, what they've done. We'll use forearms, for example. If you see, say, me use my forearm on someone, you've got two parts of the triangle. So if my forearm pushes someone away and they go off track, that's what the outcome. So you've seen me use my forearm, push someone off track. That's the penalty triangle completed. In that example, it would be a penalty, but you do have to obviously see all three things, and the outcome can vary in all sorts of situations. Just because an action's illegal doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be a penalty. Bit of a weird concept to get around, that something is illegal but not illegal enough to get a penalty. Example of that using the forearms is if someone yes, exactly. Basil, thank you. Sorry, Basil's writing things in the comments.
Yeah. But I imagine a lot of skaters get quite... Sorry, it's Catman again.
That's right,
I imagine a lot of skaters get quite frustrated with that because they'll say, oh, that person did a forearms on me, or that was a multiplayer, and they'll probably get frustrated, where you can actually... You've got that oversight that actually, yeah, they might have kind of touched you with their forearms or given you a bit of a push, but there was no impact. Is that right?
Exactly. Yeah, 100%. And I can understand being frustrating for players because they haven't seen the penalty triangle. They've only felt a forearm being used, for example.
Sorry, hi, it's Basil.
Hey, Basil.
Rookie games are a really prime example of this, where you get lots of new skaters who've just stepped up into gameplay from...
I think it's really tricky, though, because often the impact is much more subtle than someone actually going down or out of bounds. You're trying to work out whether, did it impact their balance? Did it stop someone else getting through? That's where I find it really hard to judge the impact or lack of impact.
Yeah, completely. And agreed. There's so many different kinds of impact or outcome that you have to judge. Basil, sorry, you were saying about rookie games, though.
But there's a lot, there ends up being a lot of what is illegal contact. So I think use of forearms is a really prime example of one.
Yeah.
That doesn't have sufficient impact to penalise.
Yeah.
It's just really ineffectual people who are new on skates bumping into each other. And it's great because everyone, they're learning same as we learn, but it doesn't meet that threshold. It's a really good example of things that are illegal but not impactful.
Yeah, exactly. And that is such a hard thing to judge. Another thing that's hard to judge, and everyone's favourite, is backblocks. And this is exactly what I was going to go on to talk about, thresholds for different types of penalties. Backblocks, skaters get hit in the back all the time. Not all times that someone's been blocked to the back is going to be a penalty, no matter how much it hurts. The biggest example of that is if a blocker's facing someone with their chest, that chest that they're facing is a legal blocking, that chest is a legal blocking zone. But if I go, say, using me for the example again, and Basil, do you mind if I just use you as a verbal example as well?
Of course you can.
Thanks, Bud. So yeah, say Basil's facing me with his chest and I go to block him in a derby direction with my shoulder. So legal blocking zone against Basil's chest, which is a legal target zone. If Basil then turns round at the last moment as I'm initiating a block, I can't avoid their back. So on that basis, Basil has effectively initiated with their back because they've moved last. So if I then hit Basil in the back, they go flying off into the distance, off track, it's not a penalty because Basil moved last and therefore he's the initiator. I know that's a massively hard concept for a lot of skaters to get around because getting hit in the back hurts. It really does. I've been there. I played derby very briefly and nobody wants to see that ever again. Twice actually, Sparks. You didn't see the other time. Basil, that was technically 2 times 2 jams in London. But yes, I did wear a tutu playing against and for London Roller Girls. At the time, it was London Roller Girls.
See, that seems like a really interesting concept with the initiator, because like obviously with back blocks, everyone was like, oh my god, you can't do a back block, it's always dangerous, always give a penalty. But actually in that instance, they couldn't have avoided hitting that person's back.
Yeah, and in that situation between
dangerous and could cause harm, it's not fair to. It wouldn't be fair to penalise either of them, would it?
No, exactly. It wouldn't be. And it's a hard concept to get around. And Sparks makes the exactly valid point there that it's important to remember the initiator can change at the moment of impact.
I think a more relevant point of initiation, something we see more often, is when one skater's, doing a drawback on the jammer, for example, running clockwise, and an opponent tries to stop them and gets in the way. If that opponent is the initiator of that contact, then the person running clockwise won't necessarily get a penalty for clockwise act.
Yeah, precisely.
That's often seen.
That's a really good point. Sorry, who was it that said that?
It's Tori. Hi.
Oh, hi, Tori. Sorry, I don't know who's talking. Thank you. That's really, really good point, Tori. It's all about, in that sort of situation, it's about something like called established trajectory or position, which, Ref Leopard's just made a very good point on that. So in that situation, Tori, the person that is running back has an established trajectory, then someone steps into their path, they can't avoid them. So it wouldn't be the person skating derby direction's fault, as it were, so they wouldn't get a penalty for it.
Something else I often see is that person who's stopping that run back is also skating clockwise, and they could easily pick up a clockwise penalty by running into them.
Yeah, potentially so. It's all about judging the outcome or the impact to something, and also looking at who the initiator is. And that judging of the initiator is so hard at times, because you have to see who's got established position, established trajectory, and so on. It's difficult, but it's a matter of watching derby, playing derby in some cases, reffing derby, NSOing derby, getting that practice in to be able to see and judge and where the established position and trajectory is. It's difficult. I'm not going to lie. But going on from there, things that we look at in terms of impact or outcome is simplest things. Chris, was that you that asked about a example of this to make it stick in your head?
Yep, it was.
Yeah, cool. Sorry, just making sure I recognise your username. There is examples out there, probably in the casebook, to be honest with you. But let me have a look into it. I'm pretty sure Skew's probably got an example in her blog, but I'll have to have a look around. We can post examples of stuff up there, though. What was I saying? Impacts and outcomes of actions. The biggest ones that people look at is someone going down, out of bounds. Those are your biggest ones, obviously. But you've also got things that are a bit more subtle, like things like people going severely off balance, having their trajectory severely altered, or losing position. When I say losing position, it's basically relative to everyone else on the track. So say, I'm going to use Basil and I again. If I hit Basil in the, probably not using back blocks. Back blocks aren't the best example there. If I use my forearm on Basil's shoulder, for example, and I move them out of the way, and I get past Basil, I have gained a superior position on them. Basil's just being the example for this one. I asked permission and they were fine with it. So yeah, me using my forearm to push past Basil, that would be me gaining position on them. Wouldn't in that situation, it wouldn't just have to be on Basil. It could be on a member of their team. So if I move Basil out the way and I gain position or pushed Basil forwards, but because of that moving Basil out the way forwards, I went past a member of his team. Their team. I would then get a penalty for that because I've gained something on their team. And that's, again, a very hard thing to see. And a lot of skaters don't realise that when they get penalties for things like forearms. It's difficult. I know.
Or equally, if you use a forearm on me and you don't get relative position, but one of your teammates does, that's still a penalty on you.
Yeah, exactly, because you're the one that committed the action to someone on your team gaining something. In that situation, they're gaining. Your teammate has gained a superior position because of my action in that example.
But in another scenario, say if you used your forearm on Basil, no one moved. Basil, they might have sort of shuffled a little bit, but they didn't lose their position in terms of the jammer. No one else moved. That wouldn't be a penalty. Is that right?
Sorry, say that again, Kat. My connection went then. Sorry.
So in another scenario, then, if you used a forearm on Basil's shoulder, Basil didn't they might have shuffled a bit, but they didn't lose their position in terms of on track or being in front of jam or other people. No one else moved. Would that not be a penalty then?
Yeah, if no one's gained anything. So if my team doesn't get past Basil, I don't get past Basil. Basil hasn't gone severely off balance. Then Basil doesn't go off track or down. It's an illegal action because I've used my forearm. But it's not penalty. It doesn't rise to the level of being penalisable.
Yeah. Do you think there's any instances where teams would have to be really kind of smart and on it to do this, but to take advantage of that? I imagine there wouldn't be any advantage, would there? Because they're not gaining relative position. It's not very sporting conduct anyway.
Sparks will probably be able to correct me on this, but under the old rules, pre-rules change in 2017, wasn't it that you couldn't touch a skater for more than 3 seconds with your forearm?
That changed in 2013 in my memory.
It's a while. I know it changed a while ago, but it was something like 3 seconds. And
I remember it well because I used to be very touchy-feely and get lots of minors for it, and I was really glad when they took out that.
It was a stupid rule because you just resting your forearm on someone, what's the impact there at the end of the day?
Yeah, exactly. Back to Kat's point though about using incidental contact to your advantage. As a player, there are ways you can feel opposing's trajectory a lot of the time if you've got a hand on them. Yeah. But according to the rules, unless it has impact, like the kind of impacts Beard were talking about, then no, it won't result in a penalty.
Yeah.
But a bit of touchy-feely can be strategically advantageous, even if it's not actually making an impact in terms of the rules.
Yeah, but gauging that strategic advantage as a referee, it's pretty impossible, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's probably why it's not in the rules.
Yeah, exactly. The other thing I didn't mention as well is impediment. So when I say that, if I use my forearm on yourself, Tori, so I'm going to move away from Basil because apparently he's my love child, according to Sparks. If I used my forearm and held it out and you were trying to get past me and you couldn't because my forearm was blocking you, that would be a penalty by me as well because I've impeded you getting past me. And that's a controversial penalty because a lot of skaters do believe you can't use a forearm to impede someone, but you can at the end of the day. It's hard to judge.
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely.
Hang on, say that again, Beard. You can use your forearm to impede someone, but then...
No, you can't.
Okay.
You'll get
No, a lot of skaters think you can't.
Got it.
So say I've got my forearm out. A lot of skaters think, oh, there's no way that I can impede. Let's use you as an example, Kat.
Yeah.
So, some skaters will think, if I've got my forearm out and you pushed against it, I can't impede you in that way because my forearm's not strong enough. I'm not saying that I definitely would be able to, but it's a possibility between you and me, for example. And if I did impede you with that forearm, it would be a penalty.
Anybody who doesn't believe that you can physically impede someone with your forearm has never watched like Muay Thai or boxing or any other contact sport.
Yeah.
That's a ludicrous idea.
It's essentially blocking someone in a contact sport, like boxing, for example. You go to punch someone, they block with their forearm, you've impeded them.
Right. Okay. So I guess an example I'm thinking of is say if a blocker or anyone had their arms out, forearms out, they could still have that out if another blocker pushed against them. They wouldn't have to kind of shrivel away. Is that right? They could still hold their forearms exactly where they were.
Yeah, you can hold them. You can positionally block with a forearm, but the moment you impede someone with it, then that's when it rises to the level of being a penalty.
Right. I guess at what point does your forearm being there impede someone?
Well, Stu's got it exactly there. That if you significantly altered their speed or trajectory.
Right. Okay. But if you're like just claiming space, for example, and someone's just trying to get into that space and you're just like, no, this is my space, then that's not a penalty and you don't need to shrivel away. You can hold where you are. Yeah,
exactly.
Cool. I don't know, Kat, that does sound like a impediment. Thinking about jam line starts before the whistle. That's something that I know has come up about like claiming your space and stuff. That's actually a really good question because I've always been to the belief that if you were in that position, like Kat just said, and like kind of claiming position and someone pushed against you, they could get contact before the whistle. But I don't actually see how it's any different from in gameplay now I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, contact before the whistle is held to a different metric, to be honest with you there, Tori.
Right,
so,
okay.
Pushing against someone's forearm before the whistle, it's not really penalisable. But if I use my forearm and pushed you out of the way, that's a different matter. It's using your forearm to take someone's position. I know it sounds like the first one, impeding someone with your forearm before the whistle should be penalisable, but a lot of refs will see that and go, no. And as well they should.
Cool. Interesting.
One thing with using forearms as an example and impediment as well, multiplayers, you might not be linking, but if you're using your forearm, or they might not be challenging the link, as it were, but they could be or a grasp or something along those lines, but they could still be challenging forearms, and therefore that potentially could be a penalty as well, because it's impeding someone, if that makes sense.
The forearm is a legal target zone, though, isn't it?
Yes, but say I initiated on your forearm, that first initial initiation is fine. But if you initiate on my forearm, that's fine because you're blocking a legal target zone. But if I then use that forearm and kept it there to impede you, that's when it would potentially rise to the level of being a penalty.
A forearm penalty on yourself.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's how I understand it. I think I got a bit confused with some of the wording, but it's probably my hearing rather than your talking.
I'm not using the official wording, to be honest with you. When I talk about the rules, especially in casual situations like this, I do try and make them a bit less wordy for people. But if I'm in game day situations and actually training people properly in the rules, I tend to use the actual official wording of the rules, though. So it could be a bit of both. So I know I've only gone over that quickly, but this is based on a bit of a ref boot camp that I did up in Leeds, and I only planned to talk about half an hour about this, and that's it basically, because it has been about half an hour. And then after this, I just really planned for us to talk about stuff and see if you've got any questions about Impact, really. So does anyone have any questions?
Yes, sorry, the dog was in the way. At what point for certain penalties might you start to think about expulsion in terms of the impact?
Well, it's difficult, to be honest. It's generally, if you see it, you'll know. I know that's a difficult concept to get your head around, but if it's reckless, egregious, then that's
I think people said if it makes you feel a little bit sick, then it's probably an expulsion.
Potentially so. Again, I don't tend to expel people lightly. I know there are refs out there that do, and I don't agree with that at all. I don't tend to expel people lightly. I will look. Yeah, sweet baby Jesus moment. Yeah, exactly it, Sparks. If I'm going to expel, we're talking about me as if I was head ref, because the head ref is the one that makes that final decision to expel someone. If as head ref, I think an action's expulsion worthy, I will want another ref to back that opinion up before we think about expelling them, because it's a big action. It's taking a nuclear action to get someone out of the game. You need to know it's been a mega harsh action, egregious, and all reckless.
The example I've seen before is when a player came out of the penalty box, sprinted up the straightaway, and jumped into someone's back. That's an example of quite a clear-cut expulsion kind of event.
Was that at the Northwest Quest thing in Wales?
It was a long time ago. I think it was at the first Men's European Champions.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, Twixie's made a good point there. I didn't mention the word negligent. So, yeah, negligent, intentional, reckless, egregious.
But by negligent, do we mean like they're not being considerate of safety or the rules? Is that what we mean by negligent?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. If there's been a gross negligence moment, then yeah. Yeah, and again, Twixie makes a valid point, and Skew's given an example of it there. You can decide to expel someone if it doesn't have an impact, if it's bad enough. And then Skew's gone, if there's a slide tackle that doesn't actually hit anyone, that would be reckless, intentional, even if they don't make contact with someone. That would be expulsion worthy.
Intended to punch someone in the face, but they didn't quite make it.
Yeah, exactly. If someone swung a punch at someone, but the person skated backwards and they missed because of that skating backwards, I would expel that person all day long. It's bringing the game into disrepute. It's intentional. Even if they didn't make contact, it's awful. They could injure someone in a horrendous way.
Is there anything else on that? Because I've got another thing that might be worth talking about, and that's the two contact zones that are regardless of impact. So is it forceful contact to the back and to the head? Are there two, I believe?
It's forceful, unavoidable contact.
Forceful, unavoidable, I think you mean.
Yeah, forceful, unavoidable, yes. Sorry, no, avoidable.
Yeah.
Because if I say, for example, you were facing you away from me, and you were in established position, if I swung my shoulder straight to your back, if it was forceful, I could have avoided doing that because your back was facing me. I made that choice to hit your back. But if you turned at the last minute, it wasn't avoidable. It was unavoidable.
That's And that would be, so that's a penalty regardless. So even if I didn't stumble, fall or lose position, but it was forceful, then that's enough metric to give a penalty, is it?
Yeah, avoidable forceful contact, as I think Basil was quoting the actual rules there in the comments. So forceful, avoidable contact. So even if you did
to the head and neck as well.
Yeah.
But not with the head.
Well, with the head is difficult, if I'm going to be honest. I can't remember exactly what the wording of the rules is, but I'm sure Basil or Twixie or Skew even will correct me on this. If someone's using their head to block, so they're pushing with their head, then yeah, it's going to be penalty all day long.
Regardless of impact.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the challenge with blocking with the head is being able to determine somebody's intent. And often it's not as easy to spot in the moment as somebody just really blatantly shoving their head where it shouldn't be.
Yeah.
In the rules, intentional positional blocking with the head is penalisable. But how do you tell what's intentionally positionally blocking with the head versus that's just where their head and shoulders are? It's a difficult one to judge in the moment.
Oh, massively. I mean, if someone is intentionally doing it, and you're going to know when you see it, but being able to judge that, sometimes it can be difficult because they can look innocent, a lot more innocent than they are.
I guess one example could be sticking your head over the apex when someone's coming in for an apex jump.
Yeah. I mean, that would be pretty much a textbook example.
Yeah.
So that would be unavoidable then for the jammer who hit their neck. So they wouldn't be given a penalty because the initiator was the person sticking their neck out. Is that right?
Well, in that sort of situation, it'd be that person putting their neck or head over the apex, they're positionally blocking with their head at the end of the day. So the jammer wouldn't get the penalty in that sort of situation. And as horrible as that is, because if that blocker gets hit in the head, it's going to hurt. But it's going to essentially...
Blooming fault.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of incidental contact with the head.
Yeah.
Thinking particularly, if the jammer's really nuzzling into between the two butts of a wall, with the shoulders kind of in and the head ahead of them two butts. And then if one of them butts was to break or lose balance, that jammer could easily stumble into the brace, for example, but that wouldn't be intentional, I guess, would it? So that would be kind of no impact, no penalty, or whatever you call it these days.
Yeah. It wouldn't be. I wouldn't call a penalty for someone. Yeah. You do have to have control over your body when you're falling. Hence, if you flail an arm and hit someone in the face when you're falling, that could be potentially penalisable as well. That sort of thing, but. Yeah, incidental contact that doesn't have an impact should be okay, as Twixie says. Sparks also makes a valid point as well that you can have times where both people can be considered an initiator, and that's something that's really difficult to spot.
Would that be a case of then you just weren't sure, so you can't make the call?
Yeah. You have to be sure who the initiator is at the end of the day. Again, Basil makes a really good point that skaters that lead with the head, leading with the head, if it's habitual, suggest it's possibly intentional. So we have to look at that as well.
It reminds me of something I used to do as a jammer, which was on the jam line pre-start. I used to stick my head, neck and shoulders between the blockers. Would that have been something I should have not been doing, or was that... Because I never got a penalty for it, so I assume it was good to go.
Yeah, in that sort of situation, if you're sticking your head between two blockers and no other part of your body, you're essentially positionally blocking with your head. So that's going to be really hard to spot for the referees because having two bodies around you...
Even though I was behind them skaters... and only being able to stop them moving sideways.
Well, you're essentially stopping them with your head. So that is positionally blocking with an illegal target zone, and the head is held to a higher standard.
Interesting. Does it matter that my shoulders were also in between them?
See, that makes it a bit more difficult, to be honest with you.
It's really hard, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. It's one of those, you have to see it to be able to make that call. Because
I'll see if I can find a photo for you, because I used to do it a lot.
Yeah, it's a matter of seeing what's preventing those two blockers coming together. If it's your shoulders, fine, because your shoulders are a legal target zone at the end of the day.
Right.
If it's your head, and they're a legal blocking zone as well. But if it's your head that's preventing them from zipping together, yeah, could be a penalty. But again, have to see it to call it.
Cool, interesting. I think I usually had my shoulder in there. I think I was all right.
I think in that situation, there's also the element of, if you are, by definition of what you described, between two blockers, it's really difficult for the officials to see exactly what's happening.
Yeah, exactly what I was saying.
So it could just be, we might just not have an angle because there's a body in the way.
Yeah, exactly. And if it's been done in the middle of the pack as well, it's going to be hard for all the referees to see that. And skaters are going to get annoyed at that sort of thing. And it is something that skaters get annoyed at, because being blocked to the head or someone using their head is one of the hardest things for officials to see. And understandably so, skaters get upset when they get in the head. I get it. But it is one of the hardest things to see as a referee.
Is it still true that secondary impact to the head? So, because I remember this, as a skater, again, like I'm skater turned ref now, so I'm having to look at things from a slightly different objective angle. Yeah. But I remember it being that if, you had a shoulder to the chest and then it kind of ricocheted into your chin, that was okay because it was secondary impact, I think it used to be called.
Yeah.
Is that still the case?
I think so. Someone please correct me if I'm wrong there, because I generally wouldn't call that.
I don't know. I would imagine the ricochet effect would be classed as unavoidable, because no one intentionally went for the head, and it was an unavoidable consequence, I imagine.
I don't think the, as Ski mentioned, I don't think the language of secondary contact is still in the rules in terms of that language. Yeah. It's more to do with whether that contact was avoidable. So, for example, if you initiate with your shoulder and then the person that you hit moves their head into your shoulder because of the force of the impact, you haven't initiated that impact.
Yeah.
They have.
Yeah.
I think often you'll have things where, if you've got a jammer that's trying to push through a pack, there might be some incidental contact to the head that is not forceful, isn't really initiated. It's just that their head is in a place full of human bodies moving around.
Yeah.
And if it's not forceful, then it's not penalisable. So that kind of secondary contact, I would say, yeah, that's not penalisable, but that's because it's incidental, not because it's secondary to an illegal action.
Yeah.
I think incidental was actually the word I was looking for as opposed to secondary.
No, that makes sense. And I agree with that.
Because you can have secondary impact that's forceful and avoidable, and that should be penalised. And you can have secondary impact that's just a glancing graze on the side of somebody's helmet that is just completely coincidental.
Yeah. Exactly. And moving on from that point, using a glancing example, apex jumps. If leaping contact used to be the wording of the rules, it's not really correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think it's something that's actually specifically written in the rules. But if, say, you were lining up on the apex Tory, and I, in the unlikely event that I could do an apex jump, grazed against you, glanced you, it wouldn't be a penalty because, yeah, it's a glancing example. There's been no impact there. I've not moved you out of the way. It would be fine. So, yeah, that's another example of the whole glancing contact. It's incidental, not causing anyone to lose anything. It's fine.
Even though sorry, I take that back. I thought about it. It doesn't matter. Not relevant.
As another example, if you've got a blocker that's holding a jammer back with their upper arm, and their upper arm is doing 99% of the holding back, and there's like maybe 1% that's just a tiny little bit of elbow. That elbow is kind of coincidental. They're not.
Yeah.
They're not being impeded because of the elbow. There's no intent to initiate with the elbow. It's just that the elbow is just the tip of the upper arm.
Yeah, exactly.
If the arm moves and the elbow is then doing all the work, that's now then becomes a penalty.
Yeah, agreed. To answer your point, Ref Leopard, it is illegal contact now, and yeah, you can add on the extra bit of leaping contact. It's the 3-star. That'd be a 3-star call rather than the gold star, though. So the 1-star would be illegal contact. 2-star, or I think 3-star. I don't know how you'd get a 2-star out of it, but 3-star would be all of the information. Actually, 2-star would be illegal contact. So okay, stars. In the officiating guidelines, you can do a basic call, which would be 1-star. Let's use the example of the leaping contact, airborne contact. So 1-star would be illegal contact. Thank you, Basil, for posting the cues and codes and signals. So 1-star would be limited information. So, but the minimum amount you need to do to make the call. So illegal contact. 2-star would be illegal contact, leaping or airborne contact. 3-star would be illegal contact, leaping or airborne contact on black 22, for example. So you've got 3 levels there of information you can give. All are completely fine to give if you have the capacity and time to give that information, but you don't need to do all of them.
I heard that 3rd star before of saying which opponent number it was against. That's brand new to me.
Well, it's not. Sorry, what are you going to say there, Lee?
So I think it's probably worth talking about the reason that there is this sort of star mechanism. And the reason isn't so that we can all be overwhelmed or look like the biggest, baddest referee on the planet. The reason is to make the rules easier to digest and implement.
Yeah.
So you don't have to give the whole blah, 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 blah spiel, because, and who cares, right? The code on the paperwork is the same. The end result is the same. The block, the skater goes and sits down. It's about making the rules accessible. It's not about making it harder. So don't feel that because you're only giving 1-star things that you're a shit ref. It's not about that. It's about making it accessible and still achieving the same ends. And by the way, sorry to talk about myself, but I 100% used a whole bunch of 1-star things at MEC this weekend, mostly because I forgot the long verbal cues. And guess what? That's going to happen.
Yeah, exactly, and that's completely fine.
And I'm a huge fan of what WFTDA have done with the latest bunch of rules, because they've tried to make it to say, look, if you want to go and officiate roller derby, all you have to do is read these 2 or 3 sheets of paper, and just jumpers for goalposts, chill out.
Yeah.
And if you want to be a really, really, really good ref, well, you can, and here's how to do it. But it's not important as important as it used to be.
It's not. At the end of the day, you are right, and as long as you're giving the right basic penalty, that's all you have to do. And sometimes you have to go illegal contact, move on to the next thing, because loads of stuff's happening all at the same time. And you were there with me, Lee, at MEC. There were so many times when so much stuff was happening that I could only give the 1-star cue and had to move on to the next thing.
Yeah. I mean, we're all humans. We only have a finite amount of brain space, and the skaters are gone really bloody quickly. So what's important is not that you look like a pimp-ass ref, it's that you get out the minimum required, easy-to-digest information that has the desired effect, which is NSOs, whoever puts the right code on the paper, and the skater sits down. That's what we're after.
Yeah, that's the essentials. You don't have to do more than that. You can, if you've got the capacity and time to do more, great. And it will probably help the skater understand why they've got a penalty, but you don't have to do it.
Hey, can you stop saying things as I'm halfway through typing them?
Sorry.
Cheers, man.
Any more questions around impact and stuff? I know we're kind of just generally discussing stuff now, but I think those conversations are so useful, especially if you don't have any other officials in your league.
I think the only thing I would add is that there are the impact, the threshold of the bar is different for different penalties. As we talked about, back blocks and head blocks are a stricter metric than forearms. There's a difference. There's a difference between the impact metric for blocking with an illegal blocking zone versus to an illegal target zone.
Yeah,
they're all in the rules in the casebook, but they're not in a particularly accessible format in the casebook. They're spread out among a bunch of different sections.
Yeah.
So I'm working on a post
as well, don't you?
Yeah. So there's a post in general in Discord that's links to a Google Doc. At the minute, I've only done a couple of penalties, but I'm going through each penalty code pretty much in order in the rule set. I'm picking out the quotes from the rule set that says this is the impact metric for that penalty.
Yeah.
And hopefully that'll be a useful thing for people to use when I get off my arse and finish it.
Yeah, massively. I did look at that briefly before I started this. And yeah, it's going to be a really useful document for everyone. And you've got that saved somewhere. I don't know where you had that saved, but I saw the link to it. And yeah, Basil, you can tell people where you've got it saved so people can access it.
Yeah, so it's here in Discord in the hashtag, the hash official questions. No, yes, in the official questions channel.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a Google Docs if people want to make comments or ask for edit access. It could be a collaborative thing. I'm absolutely cool with that.
Yeah. And yeah, it's going to be a brilliant document because it does, from what I've seen of it so far, it does refer to the rules, as you say. And it's got some actual more human wording, as it were, because the rules can be a bit more wordy at times, and cross-referencing stuff can just be a pain in the arse.
He's organising it in penalty order, not in the whatever random order the casebook is in.
Yeah.
It can jump between the glossary, the casebook, the rules themselves, rather than you having to search Control F and type in forearms and get 17,000 results.
Yeah, exactly. Ref Leopard, yeah, more than happy to go over that, the impact in cuts. So, cuts. Basically, this is a very basic thing. Is if you, thanks Basil, they posted a link to their what they've written. So cuts. It's quite simple in a way, but then there's lots of little complicated bits around it.
And always remember, it's cutting in line, as in American queue jumping. It's not track cut. And if anyone says track cut, I will hunt you down. Right? There's no scissors involved. It's not about cutting a ribbon at an opening ceremony. It's about queue jumping. And that's fundamental to understanding impact when it comes to cuts, I think.
Yeah.
So the American definition of cutting in line.
Yeah, exactly. It's all about gaining position on someone. So say, for example, I skate off track and I'm going to use Kia as an example. Kia's on the other team. I skate off track or get hit off track. I come on in front of Kia because they were in front of me. That would be a queue jump or a cut.
We'd also be about cuts. I was gonna. If someone beat me to it, bringing up cuts and non-physical impacts on game, so like getting position and stuff like that. An interesting one that I thought might be worth for discussion is when someone's yielding a cut, or indeed just going back, trying to go back behind the person that hit them out. It might not be a yield, but their hips enter ahead of that blocker. And then the jammer, for example, goes behind the blocker but on track. Yeah. And my best understanding, and when I brought it up on a group recently, is that is a cut unless they immediately yield it because of the hips and relative position of the hips. So I just thought it might be worth bringing that up for conversation, even though it's not a question as such.
Yeah. Yeah. Firstly, Skews made a really good point. It's not yielding; it's seeding a cut. So that's the wording of the rules, seeding the cut. And what the example you've given there, unless that jammer seeds the cut by taking themselves off track fully, that would be a cut penalty all day long.
A lot of the time they do take themselves off track fully, but the point of re-entry is hit before hips, and then as a second action, once they're back on track, they go in behind. In their head, they're going in behind the blocker, but they're not entering the track behind the blocker.
Yeah, they have to enter the track behind the blocker that had the advantage. So they're essentially, as Jeff says, at the point of re-entry, they are basically doing another cut.
Yeah, that's how I understand it. And they could seed that cut as well, couldn't they?
Yeah, as long as they do it immediately. So say I stepped on in front of you, Tori, and I then step straight back off again. I can't just skate backwards. The problem is, if they're skating backwards on track, they're not getting themselves off track immediately. The wording of the rules is you have to seed immediately. So by skating backwards on track, you're not getting yourself off track immediately.
Yeah, I see it a lot from rookies. The seed on track, so to speak. It's a common rookie mistake. I do see it missed by refs a lot as well, and I think it's probably just because they don't have the right angle for it. It's just one of them things.
Yeah,
it's interesting, the impact though, because one could, not me, but one could argue that because they've then immediately taken themselves behind that blocker, even if it was on track, then there's no real impact. Why is it considered impact? Is it just because they haven't followed the correct seeding advice? I
would say impact is they've come in front of someone. It's distracting that skater essentially by coming on in front.
They haven't.
That could be the impact. They haven't.
Still queue jumping.
Yeah, they're still queue jumping. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
and we're British, and we take queuing very, very seriously. So the only way to go to the back of the queue is to bog off the track. And you're right. This is a far cry from the other half of the penalties, which is all about contact and safety. This is just game mechanics that skaters via WFTDA have decided on. So who knows? Maybe one day what you're describing is perfectly legal, because maybe we just say, oh, as long as they go behind, then they've seeded and they're back at the queue, and maybe that's fine. But today, the gameplay mechanic is, in order to stop queue jumping, you have to leave the track.
Yeah.
At the first safe opportunity. Those poor suckers who cut and then call it off while stood on the track. And you're like, no, sorry, you had an opportunity to seed and not queue jump, and instead of doing that, you just call the jam off, and now you're going to pay for it. And it sucks, and we all hate it, but it happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got one of them not too long ago, and I was gutted, but I was so committed to call it.
Wasn't it me? I think it was me.
But it just already mentally started happening, and the taps happened before I realised I needed to seed, and I was so frustrated.
Well, on that note, if you're tapping your hips and seeding at the same time, that's fine. It's just those actions. Yeah, there you go then. You've just answered your own question.
Oh yeah, it wasn't a question. I knew exactly what had happened at the time. I think my face showed it all. It was just one of them blips. We all make mistakes.
Exactly. I've been shouted at by skaters because they say they're calling it, or the jammers, because they say they're calling it, but they're also not leaving the track. So, sorry, jammer, that's a cut penalty. I'm not going to call that jam because you're tapping your hips in that situation.
Yeah, it's interesting what Lee was saying about how, maybe at some time in the future, that type of cut might be considered no impact. But I hope it doesn't, because I know it is only game metrics. It does confuse that blocker on track. The blocker might be tempted to establish position back in front of them or change their gameplay as a result of that person being on track. So I think it's right that it does have game impact, even if it is just a, mechanics thing as opposed to a safety thing.
Yeah, I agree. I think it does have game impact because it can distract that blocker from doing whatever they were doing.
Absolutely.
And it's worth noting that those sort of mechanics, they do get reviewed and changed, right? I think, isn't it Birmingham who are trialing 10-foot engagement zones instead of the 20-foot? Right, so those sorts of game mechanic things are routinely investigated and changed. I mean, seeding was one, wasn't it?
The 10-foot thing, though, because that's going to confuse the hell out of everybody.
Sure.
Well, the point is that definition anyway, let alone changing it. Don't change.
Well, don't forget the point. The point is that they can and will change. I mean, if you recall, seeding itself was a change.
It was a change
Yeah,
I was
so,
really upset about at the time.
Basil makes a good point. Can we stop talking about the 10-foot thing, Lee? It's under an NDA.
Are there any other impact that's more about game mechanics than it is about safety? I can't think of any. Maybe false starts would be one.
Yeah, potentially so. False starts, you're not really affecting anyone unless you don't yield.
I mean, the biggest one is direction, right? What is the reason that you can only block in a Derby direction manner? It's complete mechanics, isn't it? We could take that away tomorrow.
Oh no, I disagree completely. That's
I think it's a safety thing.
Safety thing. Two things coming in together is extremely dangerous. In fact, I'd really love to see a rule change there to say any clockwise forceful impact should be penalised. I know it isn't currently, but I'd love to see that as a change in the rule because I think it's extremely dangerous, clockwise blocks and stop blocks.
Yeah, time to join the WFTDA League and make voting on that there, Tori.
Honestly, it's something I feel quite strongly about. I really struggle to watch gameplay when there's a lot of clockwise action. I think it's really dangerous. It puts people back, it gives people concussions.
Yeah.
I was about to say, I got clockwise blocked, and that's how I got my concussion because I went backwards and back into the back of my head. So I hate people doing directionals or clockwise blocks.
Yeah. Chris makes a really good point made. There are different rule set of roller derby. Also, USARs do have that rule that you can't skate backwards. You have to keep skating forwards.
I'd love to see clockwise skating still exist in the game. I think it's an interesting part of the game. I just think that any forceful clockwise block, regardless of impact, I believe it should be penalty worthy. Just like forceful impact to the back and with the head, I think it should be on the same as that.
Yeah, and I can completely see them changing that eventually. I don't think they're not there yet, obviously, but I can see them changing that because they are moving away from actions that could cause injury, and that is one of them. As Lauren says there, she got injured, but from a clockwise block. So
that's going to be really challenging to officiate. I think that's going to be really challenging to officiate because how do you distinguish between established trajectory and somebody engaging with that person who's skating clockwise? Yeah, because counter blocking is still blocking, and that I think could get messy if they change that rule. But I still agree that it's a safe rule to have.
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see how they do it.
Yeah, Ref Lippman makes a good point that a lot of clockwise blocks do affect established trajectory or established position and balance, even if they don't impede or stop someone. So that's something that, as refs, we have to take into account. Go on, Ski. If you want to make your point now, though.
It's okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. I haven't heard your voice in a long time, Skew.
Sorry, yeah, it's been a while, hasn't it? No, I was just hopping on because I know it had been asked about, and I think Ref Leopard made a comment on it as well, but these sort of impacts of things that aren't contact penalties. So you've obviously got the cutting, you've got skating out of bounds to avoid a block.
Yeah.
Because we want to penalise that. And as Ref Leopard brought up, anything that involves sort of your delay of game. So the impact there is very much on we are not resuming the game when we should be.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's that really odd thing, isn't it? Is you've got this whole spectrum of different illegal actions for which the impacts are very, very different. And it's why I think the resource that Basil's doing is going to be so useful for that.
Yeah.
One of the things I used to do at my boot camps was get people almost like to make mind map diagrams for the impacts of each individual penalty type. So you could actually see it visually and, as Basil says, get it all in that one place, whereas in the rules at the minute, it's scattered.
Yeah, massively so. And that document that Basil's writing is going to be so useful. It already is with what's in there. But if I'm going to be asked, I can't be asked to write a document like that. So I'm so thankful to Basil for writing something like that. Skating makes a good point, though. Just because someone falls backwards doesn't necessarily mean that the initiator was going clockwise. If what we look at for clockwise blocks or direction penalties, as they're now known, is the direction the skates are moving in, not the direction of the body. So if I clockwise someone with my shoulders, but my skates are moving in a Derby direction, completely fine because my skates are moving in the right direction.
That's how I understand it too. I see a lot of talk though about things can't be a stop block unless the blocker's toe stops are down, and I dispute that so much because you can absolutely be 100% stopped without even having toe stops on your skates, especially when it comes to maintaining a stopped block.
Yeah, Twixie makes a good point. You don't even have to have toe stops.
Exactly.
There's a team in America somewhere. I think there's a team in America where they train and play without toe stops.
Hot Wheel in Leeds used to.
Did they?
Yeah. They never wore toe stops. They weren't allowed to wear toe stops.
Yeah, I didn't know that, but I know there's a league in America that has that rule, as it were. But I didn't know Hot Wheel had that. But I couldn't survive without mine.
To be fair, skating without toe spots does give you exceptional edge control. There is definitely something for it. But I don't believe in taking a good tool away. You don't need to.
Yeah, I can't imagine doing that myself. As a ref, I rely on my toe stops so much.
As a jammer, I have relied on my toe stops so much.
Yeah, I can imagine. Yeah, I haven't jammed for a very long time. Whenever the London Roller Derby Roller Girls thing was that I jammed for them, that was the last time. I think that was 4 years ago now, something like that. But yeah, toe stops, great things. Can't survive without them.
Dan, I have a really quick rules clarification, just because of a scenario Tori mentioned.
Go for it.
The jam, before the whistle, the jammers need to have all parts of their body. So basically, can a jammer have their hand over the jam line on starting?
Ooh, that's a good question.
As long as there's nothing touching the track ahead of the jam line, you're good to go.
Can't touch the floor across the jam line.
Absolutely.
I would say one hand would be okay, but both hands would be no. But don't quote me on that.
If it's not touching the floor, though.
Yeah, if it's not touching the floor, yeah, it's fine.
And that's what cats.
No, but if it's touching the floor,
are like hovering over the jam line. As long as
that's fine.
The floor all day long, over the jam line, you're good.
As long as they're like the skates are behind the jam line.
Yeah.
Hover the rest of their body above, but in terms of touching the floor.
In theory, they could be on one foot with their other foot hovering over the blocker side of the jam line, and that would be a false start. So it's not about the skates being one side of the jam line. It's skates, nothing can be touching on the jam line.
I've seen jammers with big booties who's turned around, have their booty across the jammer line, interfering with the blockers in the wall.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't do it, but good for them.
I was saying before, I think before you got here, Lee, I used to frequently put my shoulders in between the blockers ahead of the jam line.
Yeah. And essentially that would be fine as well, because you're not touching the floor.
Yeah.
But the moment the jam starts, you're risking positionally blocking with your head or your shoulders, which would be fine, your shoulders, your head, not so much.
I would say
touching the floor, maybe one hand, not two hands.
Yeah, where would we stand on one hand?
Would still be a false start.
Interesting one.
Sorry, what was that, Basil?
I would say that even one hand ahead of the jam line would be a false start, because it's not down. It's not a question of down or out of bounds. It's are you legally positioned, and then also you have to be on or behind the jam line.
I would be interested. I can see what your point is. I don't know, to be honest with you. I can't answer either way on that.
Yeah,
I would apply the same rules about the out of bounds stuff. So two hands wouldn't be myself. But that's an interesting question. I honestly don't know the answer to it.
It's still a really stupid idea because you're going to get your fingers broken.
Yeah, exactly what I was about to say.
Yeah. And Stu makes a good point. Someone messaged Daniel Alt for the definitive answer.
I'll put it on the group now.
Daniel Holt's on the rules committee, so he would give a very good and detailed answer to that, I would imagine.
I'm on it.
If you're, as a jammer, if you're starting with your arms hanging over the track boundary, that's not a problem. So why would it be any different with them hanging over the jam line?
Yeah. I mean touching though, or not?
Precisely, yeah.
Yeah, well, you definitely see a lot of people touching their own blocker's hips, and I was wondering, could you take that to an extreme and like fully brace a blocker?
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do that.
That would be the extreme of that scenario.
Yeah, because you're not touching the track. You're not touching the track itself. Yeah. That would be fine. At least that's how I'd look at it. But yeah, it's a really good question about touching the floor, though, because whether one hand or both, honestly, don't know. But Ref Leopard makes a good point. I think I agree with that. I think it only refers to the jammer's feet on the jammer line, so it doesn't actually refer to the hands. But yeah, it's a whole dodgy line of having your fingers broken and so on. Yeah. Any other questions on this subject? Well, could be anything to do with impact, or even if you have general questions. Skatey's posted the bit of the rules. So when a jam begins, the jammer must be touching on or behind the jammer line. So it doesn't actually mention feet there. Good find, Skatey. Thank you.
It doesn't mention touching though.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you're right, Skatey. The last para does say about touching over the line is not okay.
Yeah, and I'd agree with Trent that it would be a false start rather than an immediate penalty because they're also partially correctly positioned.
Yeah, they're only partially over the line. So yeah, mate, I think by that basis, then yeah, one hand, I'd false start it.
Is that because it doesn't mention skates in the rule that you've come to that decision?
Yeah, because the wording of the rules is when the jam begins, the jammers must be touching on or behind the jammer line. So if they're touching with one hand over that line, they're false starting.
That's to me.
That's how I would read it anyway. Skatey, if you want to lick the track, you're more than welcome to. Skatey said so. No touching with the feet, hands, or tongue. Skatey, no, you're wrong. Oh God, I've skated at your training venue, Skatey. That is disgusting.
Well, we've all like dropped a mouth guard and put it back in our mouth without washing it, right?
No.
We have. Everyone's lying. Everyone's lying.
No, never done it myself.
Never done it because I intensely dislike mouth guards, and that is partly why.
Yeah, Twixie makes a valid point. Licking the track would be intentionally adopting a down position because, yeah, agreed. Also, could potentially be a really nasty low block as well because you're leaving your saliva on track. If we're going to go there as well.
We are straying into what happens if somebody releases a leopard territory.
Say that again.
I can't remember where I heard it, but I've heard it a few times. Somebody kind of mentioned what happens if you release a leopard onto the track. There's been one of these ridiculous questions of you can't have everything in the rules. Sometimes you just have to use some common sense.
Yeah, well, first,
in a sense, says unsporting.
Yeah, and then call the jam and then unsporting. Call the jam, get everyone out the hall. Once everyone comes back, the releasee gets an unsporting conduct penalty, yeah. Or misconduct, as it would be now known, I suppose. But
egregious unsporting.
Yeah, true, yeah. Yeah, expulsion, I'd agree with that.
But if the releasee
I've yet
was
to see that happening.
Crowd, though?
Sorry, say that again, Tori.
What if the releasee of the leopard was part of the crowd, part of the audience?
then that person needs to get out the sports hall, and we're calling the police.
So I think, Basil, you said use your common sense there, didn't you? Now, for me, what you just said goes to the very heart of why the rules are the way they are now. And we've talked about collating a document which describes every possible impact metric. And I think, I think that's a laudable goal, but also I think we have to use a note of caution here, because that's precisely what the rules used to look like, right?
Yeah. We
all remember that the rules were this incredibly dense, incredibly legalese list of 4.3.8.9 says that you cannot use the form. And it was, we have to think about the reason why the rules aren't like this anymore, and the reason why the impact metrics are sprinkled around. And I think it goes to the heart of what we talked about with the penalty calls. It's supposed to help democratize the rules. It's supposed to help the rules be more accessible so that you don't have to memorize tables and tables and tables of impact metrics. And you don't have to, as long as you understand the mechanics of the game, you can use your common sense. And I think that's really what WFTDA were trying to do with the latest rule sets. They were saying, look, here's how roller derby works. Don't go in the wrong direction. Don't use a bad tool. Don't go off the track. Don't stop the game. Don't hit someone in a bad place. That's it. That's the rules of flat track roller derby. And I think that's really neatly tied in with the 1-star penalty cues. If you know what the 1-star penalty cues are, that's basically all of roller derby. Don't go in the wrong direction. Don't use a bad thing. Don't hit someone in a bad place. And I think I applaud the WFTDA for trying to make the rules much more accessible to grassroots, common sense stuff. And I think as long as you understand the spirit of the rules, then you are free and encouraged to use common sense. I mean, I'm not talking about WFTDA playoffs. Obviously, when you get to a certain level, you need an element of consistency and what have you. But the point of the rules being the way they are now is so that any old schmuck can read them. And then you read 3 pages of A4 on the toilet and then go and ref a game and do a reasonable job. I mean, that's what I did. And so while having a reference is a laudable goal, I think we need to be careful to say you don't need to memorize all this stuff to be a good official. Well, an official.
Yes, absolutely.
Because it's supposed to be democratized. It's supposed to be a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. So that's all I wanted to say is, like, don't get hung up. Use your common sense. If you know broadly what the rules of roller derby are, you're allowed and encouraged to use your common sense.
Yeah.
Like leopards, right? There's no leopards in the rules.
Yeah. On that note, though, Skew makes a good point, but it does help to gather the examples together. And also, that's what the casebook is, examples.
I know,
doesn't cover everything, but we do need to know examples do help people's understanding at the end of the day.
Exactly right. I mean, exactly why the casebook exists. Yeah, and I'm not saying it's not a bad idea. I'm just saying that I think it's important to understand the reasons we're in the place we're at now. And the reason is WFTDA went to great pains to make the rules accessible so that roller derby was not gatekeeping, exclusionary. You have to be a super genius who can read this incredibly dense document. You know, just understand. Don't go in the wrong direction. Don't hit someone with a bad thing. Don't hit someone in a bad place. Keep the game running. Don't leave the track. Don't go in the wrong direction. That's roller derby.
Yeah, and essentially,
that's neatly tied in with the 1-star things.
Yeah, and essentially, I do agree. But you are going to need examples to fully understand the rules at the end of the day, and that's exactly why the casebook's there, to help us fully understand the rules. And more than
and at some point you will have to align with the rest of your crew. But it shouldn't be off-putting or daunting or anything like that.
Can I butt in
should be fun.
A second, because Tori, I think, wants to speak.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry, I can't see if anyone's got their hands up or anything like that. Sorry.
Do you think as well, Lee and Daniel, actually, that change in the way the rule set's formatted also means it's less open to interpretation? Because there's been a lot of times I've been involved in roller derby for coming up to 12 years, and the amount of times skaters have exploited the rules because it doesn't explicitly say you can't do something, so we're going to do this. I'm trying to think of an example other than knee starts before the single whistle came in. Do you think the new way that the rules are written make it less vulnerable to that kind of tomfoolery.
I think it's there. I think it's there to let you choose. I think you can pick up the rules and read the basics and choose to go, that's good enough for me, and that's enough to make a game of roller derby happen. And I think you can choose to say, I want to be a fantastic referee. And in that case, you're going to need to read the case book. You're going to need to talk to other refs. You're going to need to practice lots. You can choose at what level you can come in. And that's great. That was the whole point, wasn't it? You can come in as a moron, or you can try and be really, really good, or you can live your whole life as a moron like what I do. And you can make roller derby happen. And ultimately, it's such a great segue. We're tying in to Impact. Why is it that we don't penalize every little contact with forearms? It's because our mission is to make roller derby happen. Let roller derby happen. If we penalize everything, there'd be no roller derby happening.
Oh, yeah, but I'm talking about times where skaters, particularly advanced skaters, I'm talking about the big teams, Rose and VDRL and stuff. They bring in almost new strategies that may be up to question of whether they're within the spirit of the game. But sometimes in history, these things have literally changed the rules of the games. Knee starts being a prime example of the skaters actually making it really clear that we don't want these 2-whistle starts anymore. But sometimes, like the lining up 2 jammers on the start line, which VDRL were doing, I think it was VDRL, that the WFTDA, the rule people, turned around and said, no, that's not within the spirit of the game.
Yeah, and that's what the casebook's there for, so it can add to things and then clarify the rules a bit further. And
I suppose, yeah, that's a good point. That's like, why the casebook exists, so that if there are these shenanigans that come up, the rules committee can turn around and say, no, that's breaking the game, or indeed go, yeah, that's fair game.
Yeah, and that's why it's important to look at the clarifications and look at the WFTDA forum, all these routes to get these high-level changes and subtleties that you can choose to look at if you want to be a fantastic world-class referee, or you can choose to just not if you just want to get it done. But there are more avenues to this. I mean, do they still do the clarifications?
Well, they still add things to the casebook.
Yeah. And this is something, and this is also why if you go to a tournament, there's always going to be an officials meeting where we talk about the latest clarifications and stuff.
Yeah.
And so it's not just happening in a vacuum.
I suppose pinning was a recent one.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly.
But if you're going to go to a grassroots game,
explicitly say that was an illegal thing, they had to come around and clarify that was indeed illegal.
Yeah. While it's a legal blocking zone and a legal target zone, but it's unsporting doing it. But everyone thought it was fine up until that point when they clarified it, because it was a legal target zone and a legal blocking zone.
Yeah, it's a perfect.
So if you're going to a B team scrim, and you're not party to all of these minor clarifications, you can still make roller derby happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you have to use your best judgment and your common sense.
The high level, and the game is very different at high level compared to the type of games that us guys are turning up to. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, MEC's the perfect example of that. The officials that were at MEC they were all incredibly experienced, and we ended up matching each other's metrics because we had to get that metric matched, because it wouldn't be fair on the skaters if we didn't. And there were 2 crews of officials, and we had to get our metrics matched across both crews. It's difficult, but Twixie makes a perfectly valid point. Consistency is the goal, and they are right. We're not there yet.
Is there an example of consistency? Is that consistency only seen at them highest levels? Then would you say?
I would say yes. I mean, generally in areas of the country, let's use the UK for example. I'm from down south. The metrics all down south tended to generally match each other because you had the people coaching each other, working together. They adjusted their metrics to match each other. When I moved up to Wrexham, and then went to Liverpool for training, for example, and doing games up here, the metrics were different. I had to adjust what I was doing, and people had to adjust to me as well, because I would make arguments for my metric, and they would go, "Oh, actually, yeah, you're right," or they would go, "No, Beard, you're wrong. You need to change your metric," and that's fine. We're all learning. We're all adjusting.
Metric I see a difference in is over in the States and compared to here is how quickly we call an OPAC. The States, they seem to like give a little chance for the pack to kind of reform before they start shouting no pack and giving penalties. Whereas here, the rest spots a no pack, they call it immediately as soon as that pack breaks. Whereas in America, they seem to allow that pack to just kind of go apart maybe for a second or two, and then if it comes back together within a reasonable time, they don't even waste the time calling a no pack.
Yeah, agreed. I've refed out in the States a couple of times, and the packs, as Skatey says, and yourself there, Tori, packs are looser in the US.
Sounds horrible.
But you adjust to where you are at the end of the day. You play to the officials at the end of the day, because they're going to be the ones
go out the rest see it.
In the morning. But getting everyone consistent across two completely different continents, pretty hard, if I'm going to be honest with you, especially with stuff like what's immediate, what's reforming in enough time. Unless you start saying explicitly in the rules, which is going against the spirit of the rules that Lee was mentioning, unless you say they have to start reforming in a second, for example. But the rules are never going to be that explicit, and therefore getting that consistency is going to be difficult.
I think as well that the way that it's structured at the minute is good, that it allows you to have a very slightly different metric in some situations depending on the level of gameplay. So pack definition is a really good example. If I'm refereeing a rookie or a B team scrim, my expectation of immediately reform the pack is a fraction of a moment longer than if I'm refereeing London A. I expect them to know what they're doing and react faster to a no pack call. And my idea of what immediate is flexes ever so slightly.
Yeah.
Which you can't put into words or numbers.
Yeah. And Sparks does make a good point as well, like what I said about playing to the refs. So the refs, not always, Sparks, I'm not going to say always, but the refs do adjust their metrics to the levels of the skaters at times as well. And that's the point I think you're making as well there, Basil.
Yeah, exactly. I think you have an expectation of what is possible for those skaters and the control that they have over their awareness on track.
Yeah.
Just flexes words like immediately and first action and things like that.
Yeah. Agreed. Any other questions, anyone?
No, but thank you, Ben. This has been really good. I've really enjoyed this.
Well, I started off with a half an hour chat, and we just chatted for an hour and a half about things. And I think this is exactly what this sort of thing's useful for.
Yeah, it's been really engaging. I appreciate that kind of format.
No, you're more than welcome. I think that's it. More people need to chat about the rules. More we talk about stuff, the more we can compare opinions and actual rules with each other, and it helps immensely. But getting yourself out there, getting that practice in, actually implementing the rules is equally vitally important as talking about them as well.
I've got an official ref top now.
Hey,
one.
About time.
I'm doing my first thing outside of Arcadia. Wirral Christmas thing.
Cool. I'll be ready for that.
Hey, enjoy it.
Yeah, it should be good. Could be fun. I said I was only going to do it casually, but I'm kind of obsessive about things, so here I am.
Welcome to the dark side.
Yeah, see, only jam reffing so far.
Yeah, you'll get there. Pick a thing, learn it, and then expand from there. I started with jam reffing myself. It's probably one of the more simple ways to learn, and then just expand from there.
I think so, because you're just following one skater and the actions around one skater. And it helps as well that I've spent so many years jamming. I understand point scoring and lead status and stuff like that, because I've jammed and I've coached as well, which is always had to know the rules in order to coach teams. So I've got a good standing point. I know a lot of officials come in without a decade worth of experience of roller derby. So I kind of count my blessings a little bit easier for me, because I've been a rules nerd for years anyway. And I've coached, so it's really important that I understand the rules and the impacts and things like that, so that I can teach my skaters not to break them. Because I want them on track, gaining points, not in the bin, mucking up my lineup manager job. So I'm quite excited about it, and I find it really zen, jamming, reffing. No one's trying to hit you. It's that's nice, isn't it? Yeah, it's nice, and you get to skate. Yeah, exactly. Especially when you're jam reffing. On that subject though, Keir, you saying you struggle with jam reffing. I'll figure out a date of when I can do a session on jam reffing, and we can do similar. Sorry, already talking about that skew. I'll figure out my dates of when I'm free, and we'll do a similar sort of format. I'll talk for half an hour or so on jam reffing, and then we can just have a general chat about it and expand on it, and we can just go off on tangents where we need to. Let me look at what my availability, because work's a bit manic at the moment. So, but
that would be amazing. I've been having a go at jam reffing in practicing, because we do like mini scrims at the end, and I prefer that so much more to pack ref. So
pack reffing is complicated.
My brain can't keep up with pack reffing. There's too much shit going on.
It's a lot of awareness of what's going on all around you, and Lee's gone now, but internally, and I don't know if anyone else does this, internally, I'm pretty much constantly going 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, fuck, no pack, sort of thing. It's difficult. I'm not going to lie. It's probably the hardest position to get the hang of as a referee. But jam reffing, I always found the easiest, whether that was just me. But
I've enjoyed it a lot more.
I wonder if a lot of new refs are fearful of jam reffing because there's more pressure there. The mistakes maybe cost more. I wonder if a lot of that, because I know even skaters, looking at like the playing side of things, some people don't like to jam because they feel it's too much pressure. And I tell them all the time, no, it's the easiest one. It's the easiest position to play in terms of mental load, because you've got one job. Get past them. You know what I mean? Blocking requires so much extra thought and strategy and understanding of the rules.
And awareness of where you are and where everyone else is.
Yeah, but a lot of it, if people put pressure on jamming, and I wonder if it must be the same with jam reffing as well. It's pressure that refs put upon themselves to get it right.
Yeah, I think it is, in essence, the most simple position to learn. But as you say, Tori, it's the most pressure because you've got everyone's on you, because you're the one issuing the points at the end of the day. You're going to have the bench coaches making sure you're giving the right points. You're going to have your jammer making sure you're giving the right points.
And
you're going to have on the bright side, you get all the cool photos as a jam ref.
Yes.
There's a photo of me out there somewhere with me pointing at my jammer, and they're doing like the old school, touching God thing, and then the jammer's touching my finger as well. And it's like, as a jam ref, I'm not God. That's not what I'm implying, by the way. But yeah, there's a photo out there of the jammer just literally touching my finger as they go around while I'm pointing at them.
Yeah, there's a brilliant photo of me giving lead jammer's symbol back to my jam ref. There's a really good photo of us just like mirroring each other. It's like, you're lead jammer. No, you're lead jammer.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, anyway, we're getting away from the subject. Does anyone else have anything they want to talk about in regards to Impact? Because otherwise I'm just going to head off.
I feel like we've covered everything. Thanks again.
No, you're welcome. If anyone does ever have any questions, send me questions on Facebook, put them up on here so everyone can see answers. We can have general discussions offline off the call as well.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry I was late.
No. Life happens. Don't worry. I think this has been recorded. So, yeah.